My boyfriend told me I was crazy for thinking he wasn't at work. So I turned on his location sharing, and everyone saw where he really was. I'm 28F. My boyfriend, Mark, is 30. We've been together almost 3 years and have lived together for a little over 1. He works in account management, client dinners, occasional travel, so I've never been the kind of partner who micromanages schedules. But for the last few months, something was off, and the way he shut me down whenever I asked made me stop trusting the easy answers. It started with small things that didn't feel small after a while. He'd tell me he was working late and come home looking like he'd had a shower somewhere else. Receipts would appear in jacket pockets for places he never mentioned. A friend posted a photo of him at a bar, and he'd said he'd been at the office. The first few times I asked, he laughed and told me I was being paranoid. The more I asked, the more he got defensive, and the phrase, "you're crazy," became his final word on the subject. That pissed me off less than it scared me. I didn't want to be the person who accused someone out of nowhere, but I also didn't want to be gaslit into thinking my instincts were worthless. One Tuesday, he said he had to stay late preparing a pitch and would be home after 10. I made a quiet dinner, left his plate in the microwave, and told myself I'd let it go. At 10:30, his message read, "Running late. Sorry." At 11:15, he texted, "On my way." At midnight, the phone said nothing. At 12:30 a.m., friend pinged me with a photo from Instagram. Mark at a rooftop bar downtown, a drink in his hand, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. Her handle matched someone tagged in the comments as Clara, new hire. My stomach dropped. I didn't act right away. I wanted to be sure. The thing people don't tell you is how your brain zooms in on small evidence when you're primed to notice betrayal. I replayed his tone, the shrug when I'd asked, the way he'd said, "You're crazy," like a dismissal, and not an answer. I called my sister and said, "If I'm wrong, I'll look foolish. If I'm right, I don't want to let it slide." She told me something I hadn't thought of. "Remember the location sharing we set up when we traveled?" She said, "If you still have access, check it. Don't be reckless, but check." We turned that on ages ago, and then stopped using it. I opened Find My and, with my hands braced, looked up his location. His dot was not at the office. It was at the same rooftop bar, the one in my friend's photo, parked there for hours. I made screenshots. I didn't confront him in the dark on a Tuesday night. I slept on the couch because I needed distance and because the rest of the apartment felt like the wrong kind of quiet. I woke up angry and achy and determined to force a situation where his version of events couldn't be spun. We had dinner at my parents' house that Friday. A group thing, nothing special, my mom's roast. I invited Mark because it's what we always did, and because presenting a normal front is useful before a reveal. It makes the lie harder to pass off as a misunderstanding. Halfway through dessert, he launched into a story about his week, about how intense project work had been, and how grateful he was for his team. I waited, palms steady on the table. I told him I wanted to show something. I pulled my phone and mirrored the screen to the TV in the living room. Everyone turned. I opened the location app and tapped his name. The dot was live and bright and sitting at an address downtown, the rooftop bar. I scrolled back through the last 2 weeks. The dot showed the same pattern, office in the mornings. That left the office around 6-ish and ended the night at that bar for hours, sometimes until after midnight. I zoomed so the map read the address. It got very quiet. My dad dropped his fork. My brother made a face I know means disbelief. Mark's smile fell off and his color changed. He muttered, "What? You're crazy. You can't do this." He lunged for my phone gently at first, then reached a little harder when I didn't hand it over. I held it away. My mom asked quietly, "Who's Clara?" He tried the "she's a friend" line. I hit play on the gallery my friend sent, the rooftop picture that kicked this whole thing off. The room went still in that way a place goes when a fact lands and everybody rearranges. He stammered about deadlines and this being taken the wrong way and how I was humiliating him in front of my family. The word humiliate is useful when you want to flip blame, and he used it like a shield. But the map didn't humiliate, it documented. My dad asked him to sit down if he had something to say. He did not have a live explanation that lined up with the dots and pictures. He packed a bag that night. He didn't shout. I told him calmly to leave. He texted later, frantic, pleading. He called me names and told me I'd been cruel. He asked my parents not to take sides. My brother told him to go. I left it at that. The living room had already done the talking. Update, next morning. By morning, Mark had sent a text meant to hit all the vulnerabilities. I embarrassed him. I ruined him. I was cruel. He also sent one that suggested apologies and that he'd explain if I would pick up. I didn't pick up. I stayed with my parents a couple of days while the initial heat cooled. It was easier to keep perspective there. My sister and brother made plans to check in, and my dad gave me a look that said I did the sensible thing. I checked my messages from the night before, and there it was. A text from Clara to Mark saying, Last night was fun, winky face, with a heart. He'd been more than at a bar. He'd been with someone who was messaging him that way. He hadn't been at a client dinner. He'd been actively mingling. Mark called once and finally left a voicemail that laced apology with excuse. It was nothing. I was lonely, but the tone made me angrier than the admission would have. Loneliness is not a get-out-of-jail card for deception. I texted back that I wanted him to move his things out and to stop contacting me for the week, so I could think. He did, but he also sent messages to mutual friends painting me as hysterical. I got a couple of cautious texts from people I thought were close, asking if I was overreacting, but most people were quiet until I showed them the map. Update 9 days later, 9 days in, and the story had splashed into our friend group. People I trusted approached me quietly with things others had noticed. Late night posts, comments that disappeared, a few mutual coworkers who'd whispered concerns. One friend told me she'd bumped into Mark outside the bar and that he'd looked guilty. Another said she'd DM'd Clara to ask about the photo and got a curt reply. I didn't know he lived with someone. I met Mark at a coffee shop because I needed to hear the direct answer and because I wanted witnesses. He said he'd messed up. He said it had started months earlier, a connection that began with after-work chats and became something he tolerated because it felt easy. He apologized and said he'd end it. When I asked if anything physical had happened, he admitted to a handful of kisses and some late nights together. He said he loved me and that he didn't want to lose the life we'd built, saying, "I love you," while confessing to repeated deception is a jarring chamber of contradictions. I told him that love didn't erase the pattern and that trust had been broken. We argued about what forgiveness looks like and whether we could even have it. He asked for a chance. I said I needed time and that if this were to move forward, it would be with boundaries and therapy. Update 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later, HR at his company had been alerted by someone in the office. Word travels. Whether he was officially disciplined or simply moved to different shifts, the point was the same. The easy access that had let this happen was being removed. Mark claimed he'd asked to be transferred because the scene felt toxic, but I kept hearing contradictory things. It didn't matter how it shifted externally. The internal fracture was the problem. We tried therapy. The first few sessions were brutal. The counselor asked direct things. Why secrecy? Why not own the mistake? Why lie? Mark said shame and fear. That admitting the flirtation would have made him feel weak. He said that once the late night started, he let them continue because stopping felt harder than lying. He showed remorse in the room, but remorse on a couch doesn't automatically translate to changed behavior. At home, the repairs were nuts and bolts. He agreed to delete contacts, to leave his phone on the kitchen table overnight, to be open about late nights and who they were with. He did these things. He also did small things without prompting. He fixed the clogged sink I'd been meaning to call the landlord about. He kept his calendar shared. The smallness of it surprised me. It was tangible, not theatrical. Still, triggers were frequent. A ping on my phone or the memory of that rooftop kiss could set my stomach to cold. I found myself cataloging dates, excuses, receipts, and resenting that my brain wanted evidence the way it did. The counselor noticed and helped me work through the difference between useful vigilance and an inventory that becomes a weapon. Friends drifted. A couple of people in our social circle stopped inviting us out. Some people who'd been neutral became quietly supportive. Others took Mark's side at first, and then receded when they heard more. Social life rearranged, and that stung. Update 2 months later. 2 months later, the drip of drama slowed. The woman I'd seen in the Instagram photo had left town. Not a dramatic exit, but someone who decided she didn't want to be tangled in other people's lives when the costs became public. Mark's role at work changed. He stopped doing the late-night bar scene because the access point wasn't there. We kept going to therapy. He took to individual sessions to untangle why he'd chosen secret comfort over conversation. I continued therapy because part of me wanted to be sure I wasn't building a life on suspicion. Repair felt like a ledger of small entries. The dishwasher loaded without being asked. A text at 9 p.m. telling me he'd be late. A weekend where we didn't talk about relationship pain. Those small things mattered, and they were exhausting. There were relapses of suspicion. A friend would post a photo, and I'd spend the evening simmering. He learned to meet me in the space after I brought something up instead of shaming me out of the conversation. It didn't always work cleanly, but there was progress. Final update, 3 months later. 3 months after the rooftop photo, I moved out. It was decisive and not theatrical. I packed my things in a weekend and handed him the keys. He begged, he cried, he promised. He said the words he needed to say, but the pattern had existed long enough, and my line had been crossed more than once. Moving out was the clean ending I needed, a physical separation that matched the emotional one. I didn't stage a scene for social approval. I left because I realized clarity mattered more than the hope of a repaired version of what we'd been. He stayed in the apartment. He sent messages, a few calls, a last plea and a voicemail that asked for forgiveness and another chance. I listened, filed it away, and did not reply. I changed passwords, rerouted mail, and started sleeping in my sister's guest room. The silence that used to feel like waiting now felt like the start of ordinary life. A month after I left, a mutual friend told me Mark had deleted his social accounts for a while and started seeing a therapist regularly. That's not my closure. It's just a fact another person told me. My closure was making the decision and following through. If the story needs an image to end on, it's this: the lock on our apartment door, which used to be shared, now clicked shut behind me as I walked away and did not go back. No speeches, no recaps, no dramatic declarations, just a key turned, a door closed, and the quiet that follows.